Okay, so back in 2006, Leica released their very first digital rangefinder, the Leica M8, and this was a game changer at the time. But this wasn't actually the world's very first digital rangefinder. No. That crown actually goes to this camera right here. This is the Epson R-D1, the world's very first digital rangefinder that came out 2 whole years before the Leica did. But of course, when you think of Epson, you think of printers and scanners and projectors and photocopying machines and apparently even robots, but not cameras. So you can see why this camera was so easily overshadowed by the much more popular Leica M8. Today I want to actually put these two cameras head to head and see which of these so-called first digital rangefinders is technically the best one on the market. Now of course this video is pretty much 20 years too late, but seeing how it is technically speaking Epson R-D1's 20th anniversary, I feel like it's appropriate to make this comparison video. In terms of usability, both cameras are great. Of course, each have their pros and cons. So let's first start off with the Leica. Holding it in the hand, the Leica camera feels absolutely amazing to hold. Something about this metal build, I think this is brass or something, but you know, when you're holding this, it feels great in the hands. It's not too heavy, it's not really light either, but in terms of like being a giant hunk of metal, it's pretty light for what it is. So when you're holding it around, it's not really going to bother you too much, but overall it feels nice to hold. There's a premium quality to holding the Leica. There's no grip on the front, there's no real like grip on the back or anything like that, but even without it, I don't really find it to be an issue just holding it. You can also add a little thumb grip on the back where the hot shoe is as well. I actually have one of those here. Occasionally I put it on and it just gives you a little bit more to rest your thumb on, but even without it, it's not an issue at all. It feels great to hold in the hand.
Okay, so let's take a look with a little bit closer detail. So first of all, ignore the electrical tape here. You know, the trend is to always, you know, tape up the logos and such on these street photography cameras to make them a little bit more stealthier. But regardless, on the top, what we have a very convenient on-off switch that immediately goes to single, continuous, or self-timer mode. That's actually very convenient because instead of having that on another button, you can just easily switch between them with the flick of a button when you're turning on the camera. So it's very convenient having it there. Obviously, we have a shutter button. It is threaded, so it's nice. On the left of that, we have our shutter speed dial. Right now, I have the thumb grip installed, so it just makes it for a little bit easier of a hold. Over to the left side, far left side, we have a little display. This display shows how many number of shots left you have on your SD card and also the battery level as well. Now, if you do put third-party batteries in here, the battery indicator does kind of disappear. So just FYI, if you use official Leica batteries, then they do show up. Without it, it still works. It just doesn't show the battery indicator on here. On the back here, we have a few buttons on the left and then a dial on the right with the D-pad. And there's also a menu button here. So we have a play button, which is for playback, a delete button for deleting, a protect button for protecting. Pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? An info button, this is for, I believe, the display setting. Oh, I have it on self-timer. Okay, and then the set button is basically your confirm button, so you use that to confirm several things. And also, this is a very convenient button and one that you'll probably hit the most often on the back of this camera because aside from using it as a confirm button, you can also use this to basically access in a way like a quick menu. So in here, you have your ISO, you have your exposure comp, you have your white balance, your compression, your resolution, and also you can set them to one of 4 settings. So if you do have a setting that you like, a certain ISO, a certain compression, etc., you can set it to one of these 4 settings, and then once you go back to them, it'll be saved in that setting. So it's very convenient if you just want to, like, on these cameras, your ISO range doesn't really go that far, right? I mean, it pretty much maxes out at like 6400. Anything above that is pretty noisy. So you might have like maybe 3 different ISO levels, and you can just easily go into your user profile and then switch between them. And also, I have one set here for color photos and one set for black and white as well with the JPEG. So this camera is very good for black and white. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Dial on the right hand side, which doesn't really do too much except for zooming in into the photos that you've taken. The D-pad, which is just a select pad, and then the menu button, which again, most likely you'll hit this once in the beginning of owning this camera, and then afterwards you'll probably never get back into this menu screen ever again, because honestly, it's been a while since I've seen this. You know, I forgot that this was here. So in the far left, you have your optical viewfinder. This is a rangefinder, so you're going to be looking through here, but shooting through here. So there is going to be parallax. If you don't know what parallax means, basically the closer the object is to the lens, the larger the discrepancy between what you see and what you take is going to be. So just keep that in mind. You'll still be able to take the picture, but there's going to be a difference in terms of what you see versus what you actually get through the lens, just because it's so different in terms of framing between here and here. Also, usually these lenses from these rangefinder cameras don't focus that close anyway, so you most likely won't be taking close-up photography with these cameras unless you use some sort of diopter. This screen right here is the light box that accepts the light, so you can see through your optical viewfinder. So don't block that whenever you can, and make sure that that is properly exposed. On the left here, there's this little tab, which I've honestly never opened before in my life. What is this for? Oh, it's a USB plug. Oh, look at that. I did not even know this was here. Well, it accepts a mini USB, so if you have one of those lying around still, it'll take those. And then you have these strap lugs. These straps are actually pretty nice, the way that they connect to the strap. But if you take your strap off, these lugs are the most annoying thing ever. And it hurts a little bit because it's actually quite prickly on these ends here. So they have this little bullhorn design. So it's very annoying to just, accidentally touch. So yeah, feel free to change them out. But otherwise, if you do have your straps on there, they do, connect very securely, and they're pretty nice. So there you go. So on the front here, you have a little tab here. On a regular film camera, this would be your self-timer button or self-timer lever essentially. But in this case, this cycles between several frame lines inside of the optical viewfinder. So if you want to, let's say if you have a 35mm on here, but you want to check your frame lines for a different lens, you can just flick the switch and then it'll change the frame lines in the viewfinder temporarily, so you can see what a different lens will look like in terms of composition on your camera before switching lenses. So realistically speaking, I mean, you don't really use it very often, but it's there if you need to. If you've never used Leica before, the Leica system is a little bit inconvenient in terms of taking out the battery and also the memory card. It has this sort of design that sort of replicates film cameras back in the days, or at least the Leica film cameras back in the days. So you have this little lever, you open that, you twist this, and then the entire bottom comes off, and then you can access your battery and your SD card, and it even has this little thing here that looks kind of like a film canister, even though there's nothing here. But it looks kind of like a film canister, right? One thing that I do want to say about this design is that when you do have this camera attached to a tripod, you notice that the tripod is connected to the bottom plate, and the bottom plate only. It doesn't actually connect to the camera itself. Even though, yes, this is connected to the camera, but then, it's connected to this, which is only connected via these little tabs here. So realistically speaking, is that a very secure attachment? I don't know for sure, but that's what the tripod situation is going to be like.
In terms of the Epson, this one feels great as well. This one is a bigger camera though. It's a lot taller and there's more to hold on to. So, you can say that's either a pro or a con, but both of these cameras they feel nice to hold. This one in particular has a little bit more to grab onto. On the back, there's a little indent here to rest the thumb or your palm. You can rest it on this little indent. You also have the Film Advance lever that will allow you to put your thumb on here and rest it on there as well. So even without any sort of thumb grip or anything like that, you can actually hold this camera very comfortably and grip onto something very comfortably as well. You also have more rubber bits on this. On the Leica, it's a little bit less and it's not as tacky as this one is. So with a little bit more rubber on this camera, you have a very secure hold. Now, of course, that being said, this camera does feel less premium to hold. I think this is magnesium alloy, but just holding it doesn't give you that sense of premium quality as that one. Now, of course, this is much more premium than holding a plastic cameras or the cameras that you get nowadays on the market, right? But obviously, when comparing these two, the Leica is a lot more premium to hold.
Okay, so let's look at the Epson R-D1. So first of all, we have a design. That is, this is actually a very similar design to the, I believe, the Voigtlander Bessa camera. I believe it is modeled after that, so very similar looking design, but obviously inside it's different. This is a digital camera, whereas that one is a film camera. So on the right side, we first have the on-off switch, so that's this one right here. And as I flip this on, you can see that the dial starts to move around on the display over here. So we'll talk about that more in a second. On the bottom of this, we have a film advance lever, basically. You know, this is what gives it that feeling of using a film camera. Even though this has the convenience of using a digital camera, you can easily load the photos into your computer. But the usability of this is very much like a film camera. So instead of advancing your film, what you're doing here is, I believe you're clearing the shutter so you can take the next photo. Because if I don't advance this, so I'm advancing it right now and I'm taking a photo. But if I don't advance this first, I can't actually take a photo. It's not actually doing anything until and that's mainly the reason why I love using this camera, is mainly just because of this feature right here. And honestly, you're not going to be able to find another camera, digital camera at least, that has this on it. So this is really your only option if you want a authentic film style of a camera, but with digital features on the inside. On the left of that, you have the dial that we mentioned earlier. This basically displays all of the settings readily available at a glance. So on the left here, you have your white balance. On the right, you have the quality setting for your photos. You have RAW on the top, and then I believe H is a high quality and N is something else. But I believe N is the lowest quality, H is high quality JPEGs, and then R is your RAW photos. On the bottom, you have a fuel gauge. That's really just a battery indicator. So E is empty, F is full. And then on the outside of it, you have a large dial with different numbers on the number indices on the outside. That's basically showing you how many shots you have left in your SD card. So obviously it's just an approximation. You have a hot shoe, you have a lever here to switch between your different frame lines. So unlike the Leica, this one isn't automatic. So on the Leica, when you put a new lens on there, the frame lines will automatically change in the viewfinder. But for this camera, it doesn't. So you have to actually like flip the switch between the three in order to find the correct frame lines. You can also use this to preview a different lens if you want, kind of like the Leica with the little like lever on the front here. But the disadvantage here is obviously you only have 3 to choose from. So you have your 35, your 28, and your 50 millimeter. You really can't do anything else other than that, right? So everything else besides these 3 is going to be basically an approximation. But for the most part, you know, in terms of like street photography wise, these are 3 pretty commonly used focal lengths. On the left here, the far left, you have a dial that very much reminisces the old film days with the eject button, or the film door opening button thing. It replicates that, but this is actually a dial. This is basically your control dial for all of your settings and navigation in the camera. So I know it seems a little bit strange to use this dial for navigation, but if you've used this camera enough, it does make sense. And it's pretty intuitive to use. You can also pop this up for a different setting. So for example, like in playback, if you spin the dial normally, then it's a zoom in and zoom out. And if you pop this up and then spin it, then it gives you your directional options, left, right, up, and down. On the back, you have a few buttons and a lever on the side here. So again, when I mentioned that it is pretty intuitive, this is what I mean. So you have a white balance and a quality setting here. All I really need to do here is I just need to push the switch and then spin this dial, and then this the setting on the camera will change. So for example, if I push it down to quality, the Q, and then I spin this dial right here, you can see that the quality changes to high JPEG, and then the N, whatever that means, and then obviously the number of photos in the SD card changes because the quality setting is different. And then if I go up to WB, that's white balance, then I spin this, it'll give me my different white balance settings. If you're wondering what these icons mean, I always forget what they mean. That's something you have to refer to the manual or look online, because they're not very obvious, or just use it auto. So aside from the so-called film advance lever on this camera, that's really cool. The other cool thing about this is that it has this back here. So this is an LCD screen. As you can see here, it doesn't flip out all the way, but it does flip and it spins around. Again, it doesn't flip all the way out. It's not a selfie screen. What it is just a screen that you can hide. Now, obviously, what you can use this for is playback and setting your menu settings up and whatnot. But the idea here is that it's trying to replicate film, right? So you have this screen here to protect and hide away if you don't want to use it. And most of the time, they kind of have this here to encourage you to kind of just close it up. And just ignore the fact that there's a screen there because this is meant to be shot like a film camera. On the Leica, you can't do that, right? The screen is fixed there. If you don't want to use it, just ignore it. But on this, you can actually hide it and pretend it's not there. It's also one of those cameras where, you set the menu up once and you probably never go back into the menu again, especially the fact that you have your controls all here already. Oh, I also forgot to mention, the ISO is inside of this dial right here, the shutter speed dial. Inside here, there's a little window for your ISO. You have to pull the outside ring of this dial up, and then you can spin the inside of it and then change your ISO. Now this camera takes these Fujifilm NP80 batteries, which surprisingly you can still find online. So I have some of these that I bought on Amazon. I don't think they have the Fujifilm ones anymore, but I believe you can still find the third-party ones. In terms of battery life, not the best. So get 2 or 3 of these batteries and it should last you through a shoot. Now, I've actually owned both of these cameras for a very long time now, probably close to around 8 years, and I've always found that I enjoyed shooting with the Leica more. Even with Epson's very authentic quote-unquote film advanced lever, the Leica overall just shoots better. Something about the small compact body, the cold metallic body as you pick up this camera, the shutter sound, everything about this camera just feels higher end. That being said, I've never actually shot both these cameras side by side before, so the other day I decided to head out so I can A/B test these two cameras and see if my feeling towards the Leica is actually true. And of course, my theory was true. The Leica was definitely better to shoot with, and looking at the results, I honestly like the images from the Leica much more as well.
Both of these cameras run an old CCD sensor, and if you've ever heard of CCD sensors in the past, you'll know that it renders a much more film-like, a much more vintage-looking image. But the difference here is that on the Leica, they don't even have an anti-aliasing filter, nor do they have an IR cut filter. The result is you actually get an image that is much sharper and honestly pops more.
Now, there are downsides to this. Not having an IR cut filter means that sometimes when you're outside in the most absolutely unfortunate conditions, the blacks in your image will actually turn magenta. Not a difficult fix in Lightroom, but definitely something to look out for. So here's a little setup that I did in a controlled environment. Both cameras taken one after the other with the same lens and a similar setting, as similar as I can get it pretty much. The reason why I couldn't get it exactly the same is because the ISO increments on both cameras are a little different, so it's not 100% match, but it's pretty close. First obvious difference here is the focal length. So even though both cameras are using the same lens, the Epson obviously punches in a little bit more. And that's because the Leica M8 actually uses an APS-H sensor. It has a 1.33 times crop, whereas the Epson uses the traditional APS-C type sensor with a 1.5 times crop. So the Epson is a little bit more punched in. The other obvious difference is the white balance. There's clearly a mixed lighting situation here, so it's definitely a challenge for sure, but both cameras were set to auto, and I've noticed this often with the Epson camera as well, is that it tends to lean towards very warm in terms of white balance. Whichever white balance setting that I use, it always tends to lean a little bit more warmer, and this is a prime example of that. As you can see here, both cameras on the auto white balance setting, and the Leica just does a much better job getting the lighting much more true to life than the Epson.
Overall, I wish I could mush these two cameras together because there's definitely pros and cons of each, but if I can only choose one, I think I would still lean a little bit more towards the Leica M8. The images on the Leica look a lot better, they pop a lot more, the colors are richer. In terms of the usability of the body, it's very intuitive. It's not as film-like as the Epson R-D1, but I would say it's like 85% there. It still feels like you're shooting a film camera. The shutter feels amazing. The shutter slap feels very much like a film camera. So overall, using it feels very much like a film camera, just not as much as the Epson R-D1. I think the main thing that the Epson R-D1 has going for it is definitely the film advanced lever. That aspect of it is very unique to this camera and this camera only, excluding the upgraded models of this, the Epson R-D1 2 or something like that. But anyways, in the same line, this is the only real camera with a film advanced lever that's digital as well. So this is really the only thing going for it. If you want that truly film experience on a digital body, this is really your only option. But overall, in terms of the package of what the camera offers, I think the Leica M8 is still better. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the Leica M8 versus the Epson R-D1. If you agree with me, perfect, give me a like. If you disagree with me, that's okay as well. Let me know why in the comments below. All right, bye.